welcome one and all. It's time for yet another spicy, red-hot, sizzling, tingling, mouth-watering, finger-licking good edition of Tournament Report, Kings of War. This time, it's Krampus Karnage, a Christmassy themed tournament that took place at the weekend in Preston, run by the fine folks at Golden Troll. And this report would have been a couple of days earlier. However, I had a bit of a cough for the last few days, so this stream is also acting as a voice test to see if I can actually function in society again and return to work and all those really exciting things. So we'll see if I can get through this stream. And first thing you'll see on your screen is 2 Shadow Hulks in the thumbnail, which of course means that both of them are going to be used at this event. And when I looked at my tournament calendar a few weeks ago, I realised there was a bit of a gap and there wouldn't have been any Kings of War for a few weeks. So I thought, you know what, let's go a little bit further than usual, travel all the way up to the dark, dark lands of Preston and attend this one. And then I almost didn't make it there because the train was cancelled on the day. Well, it wasn't cancelled on the day, the train on the day of the event that I was going to take very early in the morning was cancelled. So a couple of days beforehand, I changed my plans and travelled up via a coach instead and stayed up north, and then I travelled back the day after the event. So, almost didn't make it. Was it worth it then? Well, of course it was. So let's look at my list first of all. So before I start diving into my list too much, my thought process for this event, it's a small event, I think there's only 12 players, and I was looking at the rankings beforehand and thought, you know what, even if I win this one, I'm not sure it actually moves me up in the rankings at all. Maybe if I win it would slightly, but any other result I don't think it actually nudges me too far up, because it's quite a small event, just a one day with not that many players, so it's not going to be worth that many points. So instead of maybe trying to squeeze the ultimate filth into a list, I instead decided what I'm going to do is take all the new cool stuff that I've painted and then pick from my army all the units I think look the coolest for the most part and see if I can get a best painted award maybe. That would be nice, wouldn't it? And at the same time try out some new units. So the double Shadow Hulk obviously hasn't been tried before because I've only had one up until now. I didn't have a Legion of Bloodworms until a couple of weeks ago. So they're ready for action as well, so they can go straight in there. And they are actually supposedly very, very good, as I saw once against them. And so it's not entirely friendly, because there are Bloodworms in there, which are considered some kind of filth at the moment. And you can see, actually, that they have the Brew of Sharpness on them as well, making them even scarier. They do become very expensive, though. 335 points, and you'll see in a minute that I've invested in another unit to make them even more powerful. So it becomes very, very expensive, but they do murder things. Look at that, 40 attacks. They're on 3s now with the Brew of Sharpness. So quite scary. We've got a regiment of Reapers who have taken a bit of a hit with the new book, lost some attacks, but they're also gone down in points a bit as well. Phantoms, a troop of them, just because the Soul Flayers have dropped down to speed 8, and you need at least a speed 10 unit in my opinion. You can't get away with 0. So Phantoms are in there. Butcher Horde. You'll see there aren't a lot of artifacts in this list. I think the Bloodworms have one of 2 in the list, their Brew of Sharpness. So the Butchers don't have one. Often I would put an artifact on a unit like Butchers, but didn't have the points to spare in this list. Soul Flayers, who are now speed 8, as I said, so not quite scary. Fiends, giving them a try for the first time as well, trying out another new unit, untested. A horde of them. They're also speed 8, but they don't fly. And they have a lot more attacks, but they only hit on 4s rather than 3s. And we've got 2 Mind Screeches, the usual. And I'm sure I'll go to an event at some point with 0 Mind Screeches, just to see how it goes, but they seem like the default, one of the default units in the list. Then we've got, as I bring the arrow onto the screen for the first time perhaps, we've got the 2 Shadow Hulks there, and we've got a Horror, a Spellcaster with a Vicious Aura for infantry only, Inspiring Talisman, which I found out you can actually take with Nightstalkers, and you don't have to only steal Inspiring from the enemy, you can also just have it yourself, which I've been neglecting because I didn't realise it was allowed in this edition. Then Lightning Bolt and Bane Chant 2 as the spells. So, the only units that can be affected by that vicious aura are the Bloodworms and the Reapers. They're the only infantry units. So, we'll be able to give Vicious to those two. Bane Chant as well. The main reason the horror is in the list is to inspire and to provide Bane Chant to the Bloodworms, because adding that Crushing Strength 1 onto 40 attacks is quite significant. And other than that, there is one other unit actually in the list. Every army got a Krampus miniature. This is Krampus Karnage after all. So Krampus himself, he flies around randomly, random movement starting in the middle of your setup area, and he applies a random effect around him wherever he lands, which can either be a vicious aura, Radiance of Life, just healing everyone nearby, or Cloak of Death and damaging everyone nearby. So he's going to cause a bit of mischief, and potentially he could damage your own army. And both sides have a Krampus, so they could clash in the middle, who knows. So this is the army I'm up against in round 1. I'll just show you the battlefield first. So there it is. And it is the Gold Rush scenario. So here's how this one works. Before rolling off the two sides, place 7 loot counters on the board. The players take it in turns to place 1 loot counter each. You do not put one directly in the centre unless you choose to. And victory points are awarded at the end of the game. 1 victory point for each loot counter you control. So, loot counters, of course, being the tokens that you can pick up off the ground. Often in scenarios with those, you end up having to collect them from the centre line, but not in this one. So, let's have a look at the enemy list, which is Varangur, 3 Hordes of the Fallen, all with different upgrades. So one has Blessing of the Gods, one has Chant of Hate, one has Brew of Sharpness. So all just to make them slightly killier than they already are, which is quite killy anyway. So they're all very expensive units, all either just below or exactly dead on 300 points. So fast, decent number of attacks, hard hitting, quality units. Mounted Sons of Korgan, speed 9, cavalry unit, with Brew of Haste, which is why they're up to speed 9. 2 Cavern Dwellers, which are your standard big monsters, with random attacks. There are a couple of mages, one of them with Amulet the Fireheart, Lightning Bolt, Bane Chant, Wither and Perish, which I believe is the one that's a bit like Weakness, but it also does damage. So it makes you a weaker at hitting things, is that correct? And there's another one that has Drain Life 6. And I maintain that Drain Life is the most overpowered spell in the game, but maybe because I haven't faced all the spells. Then 2 Thanes on Frostfang. So, they're not Lords on Frostfang. They were considered very, very powerful recently. I don't know if they had much of a nerf in the book, they may have done. But these ones are the cheaper version. So speed 7, only 6 attacks each. Still pretty scary and decent, but there we go. So not a lot of units I'm facing down. How many units is it in there? Total units 10, unit strength 16, whereas I've got 11 units, so 1 more, but 5 more unit strength. So I've got my more significant board presence. So, you can see where we've put the tokens. There's one here, there is one there, there, and in fact let's just get I'm sure I've got a bit of an overhead view somewhere. There's one right in front of the enemy lines there, there's one in the woods. You do this before choosing sides, so you can't just put them all on your own side. So those are the 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, there's one right under the Shadow Hulk, 5, 6, and I think there's one here as well, in front of the Bloodworms. So, this one is kind of out on its own, all the rest are in this area here, which is why we've put so much, or everything should I say, into this zone right here. I've only got 1 Mind Screech out on that side. Opponent has absolutely nothing over there except coffee and various accessories and gaming aids. So we're not thinking that that side is going to be too contested. I should point out as well, the scoring for this event is very similar to the last Kings of War tournament, which was the Birmingham Bull Run. So, a little bit different from what the scoring system usually is in Kings of War, because rather than having a set number of points for a win, a draw, or a loss, you accumulate victory points based entirely, or tournament points based entirely on your victory points in the game. So in each one of your 3 games at the event, you can earn up to 7 victory points per game. So that'll translate directly into tournament points. And then you'll get up to 3 extra points depending on how much stuff you kill from the opposing army. So if you just win the scenario by having 1 objective and your opponent has 0, then you're not going to get very many points. And you may end up having less points than someone who lost a game, but maybe had 3 tokens and their opponent had 4. They would lose technically, but they would get more points than you. So you want to win, of course, because you're depriving your opponent of points by doing that, but you also want to get as many points as possible while doing it. So it's in your best interest to try and score highly and also kill lots of stuff to get the bonus points, because the points aren't going to be that easy to come by otherwise. If you have a bad first round, for example, especially when there's only 3 rounds in the event, someone could possibly stretch into a big lead at the top of the table and get away from you. So you want to put points on the board whenever you can. So let's have a look at my setup. We've got the other Mind Screech at this end, the Fiends here, which I was using these models as Soul Flayers at the last event, but using them as Fiends here. Then some actual Soul Flayers, Butchers, Shadow Hulk number 1, and Phantoms, the Reapers. There's the Bloodworm Legion with the horror behind, and there's Krampus. We were all given a Krampus miniature, by the way, for this event, which is very nice, and I'm sure I'll paint mine at some point. Or I might put it into a unit, maybe. We'll see. And then the other Shadow Hulk out there in the woods. So I often put the Shadow Hulks in a position where they're either starting in difficult terrain or they're going to have to walk directly over difficult terrain. That's because they're one of the few units in the army that has Strider, so they're not going to suffer a hindered charge for doing so. Of course, starting them on open ground gives you the advantage of being able to move at the double as well, but also starting them in the woods, for example, means that they're going to have cover in addition to being stealthy. So against anything that's shooty, which this army isn't particularly, but sometimes you get a benefit for that. So I believe my opponent elected to go first and starts pushing forward onto some of the objectives, picks this one up here. So the Fallen are these 3, and the Mounted Suns are... Hold on, let's see. No, those might be the Mounted Suns, actually, and then the Fallen are those 3 there. So the Mounted Suns are the ones with the big blades up in the air, which would be that unit here. So Fallen, 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 Mounted Suns. So they're all quite fast, similar kind of units. And the small amount of shooting there is, which was lightning bolt related for the most part, targets the Mind Screech there and does 4 damage. And there we go. I wanted to go second on this scenario. Anytime there's objectives to grab or territory to be in, I typically like to go second unless I have a really compelling reason to go first, because I like to be able to strike last, knowing that my opponent can't counter it. Jump on an objective, pick up an objective, and not have to worry about which way you're facing and that kind of thing. Not having to worry about the objective being stolen back off you by the enemy, and not having to worry about your opponent jumping into a territory that you're currently scoring. So generally I like to go second unless, as I said, there's a compelling reason. A compelling reason would be a serious gun line with a greater than 24-inch range, because then you'd want to get close to it as fast as possible. If it's a 24-inch range gun line, then probably still prefer to go second in a lot of cases, because it means they're going to have 1 turn of moving, which means their shooting is not going to be as powerful, rather than having every turn of their shooting being at full power. So, turn 1 for me. I'm pushing forward, and the plan here is to leave a couple of units in charge range, but not in positions for being heavily multi-charged. The only multi-charged units I've left are this Shadow Hulk, and you'd have to be a special kind of crazy to want to charge into this Shadow Hulk there with a couple of units, knowing that you're immediately going to get minced by all my best fighting units that are standing right there. So if anything comes in here, it's just a bonus. this Shadow Hulk staying in there in the woods, because why not? And the Bloodworms, I've pushed them forward. The main goal with them is to not get double charged or triple charged. If I can make sure only one unit hits them at a time, they're not going to die. So, I have put a bit of damage with my lightning bolt onto this Frostfang, and a bit of damage onto the cavalry unit there. So, it's still a bit of a standoff. I've got my fiends on the hill, so if they get to charge down, they'll get the extra thunderous charge. And everyone else is just waiting to strike, waiting to see what the enemy are going to do. Because at the moment, I'm holding... Let's see, which objectives have I got? I think I'm holding 2 here. I think the Butchers might have 1, and the Bloodworms. There's a third one there. My opponent has 1 here on the Fallen. 1 on this guy, which I think... Is that a Cavern Dweller, that one? Will be. And there is a third one here, which can be claimed next turn, if my opponent chooses to. And then the tiebreaker one is all the way out there. So if we don't start killing each other, we may have to actually worry about that one at some point. Turn 2. So, the Varangur, you can see there've been some measuring sticks put down here to make sure no one's getting into any charge ranges they don't intend to. And in fact, some of them are backing away. Isn't a very Varangur-like manoeuvre. But I'm identifying a potential flaw with my list here, which is I don't have that much speed. I've got 2 units that are speed 8, 1 weak unit at speed 10. Everything else is really 6 or below. So, I can't give my opponent a compelling reason to commit forwards, really. Because I don't have that much shooting. I've only got a total of Lightning Bolt 15 if all my units use Lightning Bolt, which sounds like a lot, but really you probably expect to get about 7 hits out of that. And you're not going to kill a lot. Okay, so you can see most of these units staying out of charge range of most of my units. They don't want to get hit, of course. And yeah, so I think that their plan at the moment, the Varangur, is back away, grab tokens, and try and entice me in, so I have to push units forward and then just charge in and kill any units that I leave exposed if I can't push forward cohesively. Turn 2 for me. So again, moving forward, but making sure I'm not offering too many horrible triple multi-charges. You can see that this Frostfang is actually running away from me. So the Mind Screech is just chasing over there, ready to lightning bolt it again. And yeah, you can see which units I don't mind being charged. Shadow Hulk, you want to charge that. Again, just everything's looking at you. Charge this one. I've got the Reapers right there, ready to strike at anything. And do some damage there to the Frostfang, and some more to the Cavalry. And then, yeah, so not much action yet. Turn 3. So again, there's careful measuring going on to make sure that they're not going into charge range of the Shadow Hulks. However, this Frostfang Thane jumps onto the token, so I'm going to have some charges available to me. And some other units, in fact, have completely turned around and gone in this direction, away from me. So as I try and come around this flank, they're actually going in the opposite direction, which is fair. And if this scoring for this tournament was different, if it was purely points based on whether you win or lose, I would not be concerned about chasing them down. I'd just be trying to get one more objective than them and standing off. However, because you get those 3 bonus points for killing, I do want to get in there and kill. And I do want to hold more than 3 objectives, really, at the end of the game to get those extra points, but we'll see if I actually can. But very standoffish at the moment from the Varangur. They're not that interested in engaging right now. A little bit of damage onto the Shadow Hulk there. Not overly concerned. And going on to my next turn. So obviously I've got 1 charge available to me. The Shadow Hulk can charge this thing. I don't think I've got any other charges available to me. Also, around this point during the game, we found out that there's no turn 7s at this event. So, yeah, so if we were both playing cautiously, thinking we might have another turn, then we're definitely not going to have another turn. I can't remember exactly the moment we found that out, but it was midway through the game. I don't think it was mentioned in the tournament pack, but I don't mind being turn 7s or not, to be honest. If you don't have turn 7s, then going second, I think, can be slightly more advantageous, because not only do you know you're going last, you also know the exact moment that the game is going to end. So there is definitely not going to be another turn after your turn 6, so you can plan accordingly. And the Shadow Hulk, of course, charges in there. I've got to get fighting. It doesn't do much, though. Very disappointing. Everyone else, the Bloodworms are moving up, staying out of the charge arc of, I think, this unit. Only this one would be able to charge in. The Phantoms have been very bold because there's nothing looking at them. These two units are facing that way. The Cavern Dweller is facing this way, so nothing can see the Phantoms at the moment. So they're quite safe there. Shadow Hulk moving in. And I've picked up the token, I think, with the Fiends there. The Butchers have got one as well. I've got my 3. And my opponent has 1, 2, 3. I think this guy has 1. So, still not much going on, not much action. More damage plinked onto that Thane on Frostfang. And if you hear any silence, by the way, then it's because I have muted the microphone so I can cough. So, on to turn 4. Yes, not 3, definitely 4. So, what are these units going to do? Triple charge into the Shadow Hulk. And probably a good move, because if you don't kill it, you're exposing your flank to Bloodworms. So you might as well go all in and try and get rid of something. And these units aren't deemed as necessary to winning the game, by the looks of it, by the Varangur at the moment. So this token carrying unit is considered important, obviously, because it's got a token. But the most valuable unit, shall we say, at this stage would be anyone who's carrying a token. So these two Cavern Dwellers, who are just backing away. And they're all turning around to make sure they're not going to get recharged by Phantoms, which is about the only time that unit would do any damage to you. And a bit of shooting. Reapers take a few wounds. And the Shadow Hulk gets killed by a billion attacks there. Not that big of a surprise, but the Bloodworms will get to fight now. So, my plan of attack. You can see that the Bloodworms go straight in there, murder the unit, and then turn round. The Horror was there, Bane chanting them up as well. Everyone else is just getting in position to strike, except the Phantoms, who have decided to just fly straight over the top of the enemy, because there is a token out here. And if anyone wants to actually win the game, then they may have to get that token. So the Phantoms, realising that there's nothing looking backwards at all, are just turning around, well, not turning around, they're forcing the enemy maybe to turn round if they want to stop this from happening. Phantoms are just looking at that token over there, which they're going to fly to if they're unopposed. You can see the Krampus there and the Krampus there. They haven't really had much of an effect on this game yet, because they haven't been close enough, or they've given an effect that wasn't relevant at the time. So sometimes they'll give the Vicious aura while no units are nearby. So it is very random. You can see that I've dropped tokens with Bloodworms, picked them up with the Horrors. Did I say Horrors? I meant Reapers. And the Soul Flayers have also got some there. Soul Flayers are probably not going to keep the token, they've just got it for now, but next turn they can always drop it here and the Butchers can take it off them. Turn 5. So we've got 1 unit into the Bloodworms, 1 into this Shadow Hulk, and quite a bit of damage, but not enough to worry these two very, very tough survivable units. And down here, so this Thane has turned round and is going towards that token. And these Fallen have turned round to look at my Phantoms. So, what fiendish ploy have I got up my sleeve here? Because if I can just land on that token, it's only my turn 5, so I'm going to get charged immediately and killed. by anything, because I won't have enough pivots to actually get there and then turn round. So it would be a rear charge or a flank charge at best. So, what else can I do? Let's find out. So down here, Bloodworms are going to go back in there. Shadow Hulk and the Fiends are going to eat that unit. The Soul Flayers, so let me just show you where the Soul Flayers were. They were here. There's 2 individuals. We determined there was just enough space for them to charge one of them. They charged one, killed it, overran into the other one. Couldn't quite kill the second one, because if they did, they would have had a good chance of overrunning into the rear of this Fallen unit, which would have been hilarious, but they could not quite get past the second individual. So that would have been great, but alas. So this is what I've done with the Phantoms. They land here. And by my calculations, this is the only way to prevent the enemy from reaching this token in the next turn. Because if the enemy pick that token up, I'm going to have a tough time getting it off them. Because it would mean killing a unit, and I don't have much that could charge over here. Had I killed this unit with a rear overrun from the Soul Flayers, then it would have been slightly different. But I'm not confident I can kill these. Just had to cough a second there. I'm not confident that I can kill either of these unhurt units if they're holding that token. So all I have to do is position the Phantoms in such a way that prevents either of them from making it there. Now, this Thane can drop its token and go onto this one, but not anymore because of the positioning of this unit. This unit now no longer has enough movement and pivots to get there. It would need to pivot once, go this way, pivot again, and go that way, and it only reaches about here. So it's not going to get far enough. This unit can't just run straight through the Phantoms, so it would have to pivot, in which case it can't get there. So it can charge the Phantoms. If the Phantoms weren't here, this unit could just go straight onto the token, or it could drop its token, the Fallen could come and pick it up, and this guy could go and pick this one up. I had to position very carefully to make sure I was blocking all these options. That means the enemy definitely cannot get that token in the next turn. And if the Phantoms live through the charge they're about to receive, then they could go and pick it up, potentially. So let's find out what happens. We have got some people in the chat, by the way. Hello to Batzuka and Desmond Ho. Greetings from Malaysia, apparently. So, as you can see here, I'm actually inflicting a decent number of kills at this stage. I think that unit in the corner is actually dead. They're just on the table still. That unit's not dead. That's running away with the token. But I'm racking up the kill points now. Because once you catch up with an army whose objective is to hold the tokens and flee, then they're often not in the best position to fight. And you can see on turn 6 now what is accomplished. Hold on. Let's see. Oh yeah, the Fiends had faced this way as well. But in the previous picture, I hadn't done it yet. So, down here we've got the charge from the Fallen onto the Phantoms, obviously. This guy's just running away with his token. And my opponent has decided, obviously, can't reach that, might as well try and settle for a draw. I don't think he can even really target my units that are carrying tokens either. The best he can do is a draw at this stage. And I could potentially get a win. It would mean killing this thing and taking the token off it, which is going to be very tough. Or it would mean somehow the Phantoms surviving and going backwards onto that token. So the Frostfang here does some damage to the Fiends. Just kill point attempts really, but not much is accomplished there. Turn 6 for me. So, the Phantoms got killed as you see. Everyone charges in around here, murders the units that are there. The Soul Flayers try to kill this unit of Fallen. So I had the choice of charging the Fallen or the Cavern Dweller with the token. And I thought, you know what? If I get a really lucky roll, maybe I could kill the Cavern Dweller and steal the token off him and get more victory points. However, it's so unlikely. I was looking at these stats, and it's actually tougher to kill than the Fallen by my reckoning. So I decide, you know what, I'm just going to try and kill the Fallen instead and get more kill points, which is going to get me more victory points potentially anyway, and it's more achievable. But they obviously don't manage that either, so they had even less chance of killing the Cavern Dweller. And here, Fiends can't kill the Thane. So it's just going to end with a draw, effectively. So 3 victory points each. However, I've scored more kill points, so the amount of units that I've killed, that's going to give me 2 bonus points, and my opponent gets 1 bonus point for kill. So it's technically a draw on the scenario, but I've ended with slightly more tournament points going into the next round. So a decent score there. You can see the units that are carrying the tokens because they've been dropped and then picked up by other units, less important units. So I'm glad the amount of kills I managed to do at the end. I'm pleased that it went that way. It was looking like it was going to be a bit of a stalemate with no kill points given out at one stage, but I did manage to catch up with the Varangur in the end and do some killing. So I took pictures of the armies then at lunchtime, and this is mine in all its glory. And you can see the Krampus there as well. Obviously not painted because we were only given them on the day. But first outing for the Bloodworm Legion, first outing for this Shadow Hulk, first outing as these guys as Fiends. And I haven't used the Phantoms much either yet, actually. So I'm not sure if it's the first event for them. It might well be. And some more armies. Some of them not quite laid out in a display fashion. Some of them aren't quite finished being painted either. And some of them on their trays. That's quite an attractive one if you ignore the one cardboard base there. Work in progress here, but this one's looking like it's going to be good when it's done. Here we've got some very nice orcs. And this one was actually in its box, because obviously the owner of this army wasn't considering it as an option for the best painted award because most of it isn't painted. But I thought I'd take a picture of it anyway, just to be sneaky. And then we've got some elves. We've got some Northern Alliance by the looks of it there. Very spicy. And we have got some... I think these are dwarves. It's thrown me off because I think these are giant rats. So I'm going to assume that those are the Mastiff units. Because they do look like dwarves, don't they, these? Then we've got the Varangur that I just faced. And on to the next scenario. So it's Hold the Line, which is a scenario that's been played quite a lot recently. And you have 3 areas. It's similar to Control, in that you have to have your units within a certain section of the battlefield, and then you total up the unit strength within those sections to see who holds each one, and then you earn a number of points specified for each zone. So this square here is worth 2. That one is also worth 2, and then this middle area here is worth 3. So some similarities to Dominate, some similarities to Control. And obviously a maximum of 7 victory points on offer. And here we go, and I'm up against the Kingdoms of Men. And when I hear Kingdoms of Men, the first thing I think is going to have knights, and it's going to have a lot of guns. And both of those things are true. So here's the list. Footguard, Horde. So, hitting on 3s with 25 attacks, that's pretty spicy. Bowman, Horde, 20 attacks with a ranged stat of 5+. So, standard Bowman, 3 knight units, 2 regiments, and a knight horde, which is obviously very scary. 300, is that 380 points there? It's a lot. With Brew of Sharpness, they're hitting on 2s with those 32 attacks, with Thunderous Charge 2. So very scary unit at speed 8. Mounted Scouts, so a few short bow shots there, and a bit of chaff. 2 Siege Artillery units. And when I see artillery, I'm not that concerned generally with Nightstalkers because they're always going to be hitting on 6s and they don't have that many shots. So they probably won't hit that often. And then there's an Army Standard Bearer with Banechant, with the Loot of Insatiable Darkness. A couple of Wizards. One with, let's see, one with Heal and Shroud of the Saint, for the extra heal. And one with Banechant and Lightning Bolt. So 2 lots of Bane Chant. And there's a General on Winged Beast, 2 of those infect, and fairly standard flying hero monster. So you'd compare them to things like vampires on Pegasus and the halfling one as well, isn't there, on the big winged Arales. So any of those type of units. So monster sized, flying with a hero on it. So pretty spicy, very inspiring on there as well. So slightly more units than I've got, but slightly lower unit strength. The Bloodworm Legion makes up a big portion of my unit strength, by the way. So let's have a look at the plan I've got here. So I've got the sections marked out with these tokens, so you can see where the units need to be at the end of the game. So this is the valuable area here. My ploy is to put everything in the middle. And if I need to then get out into one of the side sections, then that's fine, because they can always slip a bit to the right or a bit to the left. I've got this one horde of fiends out here as a bit of a deterrent, because I'd rather not get flanked by things like flyers or night hordes. So what I like about this side is that we've got this piece of terrain here, which is going to make it very difficult, and there's also a big forest. The only things that can see over the forest would be a Shadow Hulk on a hill, or something similar on a hill. So if I push up, I've got this to cover my flank, and then when I pushed up far enough, I've got the forest to cover my flank as well. So if I can just deter them from coming all the way down in here with the fiends, then the fiends will be doing their job. If they're tying up multiple expensive, potentially annoying units, because often when you're up against a lot of speed like this, people will hug a flank. But I feel like in this scenario, I want to be in a position to strike at all of the scoring areas to maximise my points if the battle's going well. So I want to be in the middle. So you can see that my opponent has gone first. I think I actually may have won the roll-off and decreed that my opponent would go first, because, as I was saying before, it's going to give 1 round of suboptimal shooting. I've also, though, given my opponent the chance to advance with these units and get into flanking positions, but I decide that that's a risk worth taking to prevent the bowmen from having an unhindered round 1. So not much is going to be accomplished with their shooting because of that. The artillery miss, and the bowmen don't really do much either. So turn 1 for me. Pushing up, keeping everything out of line of sight of those knights on the hill. Make sure they're not going to get murdered, and out of charge range. And I've put the Reapers facing this way in case anyone decides to get any idea of charging the fiends. Make them think twice. Bloodworms. Bloodworms, I wouldn't be worried about the enemy shooting the Bloodworms. They've got nerve 25, 28, and they're not scared. With the Phantoms behind them to hide. Shadow Hulk on either side. And Butchers pushing up as well. Because there's not really a speed threat here. My Soul Flayers decide, you know what, we can just fly straight forward as fast as possible and look for a charge in the next turn. Because the enemy fast stuff is all the way out there. So I'm going to, unless the archers go backwards really far, I'm not even sure they can actually go backwards far enough. So there's going to be a good chance of a charge into the archer horde next turn. My Mind Screeches are staying back a bit. And I think I did Lightning Bolt something, but not much was accomplished. And that's how it's looking at the moment. So, obviously, the Kingdoms of Men here would like to pepper my units with gunfire, but against Nightstalkers it's not always that easy, with the stealthy at play. On to turn 2. So Krampus has Cloak of Death activated for this turn and does damage to all his own units, which is quite funny. And not much else has accomplished that turn because all the shooting really missed again. Lots of just repositioning. So you can see this guy's positioning out of the charge arc of the fiends, so they can't be seen. It can't be seen by the fiends. These guys are out of charge range. They have the same speed as the fiends, so I can deter them from coming forward. But if my flank starts getting threatened by this guy, then I may have to change my tune. And I'm still going to be able to use the woods. These knights have actually backed up rather than charged into the Shadow Hulk, because if they stayed there they could be charged, and obviously they don't want that right now. So the archers can't go back far enough to prevent this charge coming in a moment. They do shoot at the Soul Flayers and do 2 wounds. Not enough though. Turn 2 for me. That human measuring going on. So the Soul Flayers do go in there, and they've done some wounds to the bowman. And I just want to stop them shooting for a turn, and it gets me up the table. And other things aren't going to get shot next turn either. We'll see if they can survive the counter-attack, because archers do have a decent number of attacks. And what else have I done this turn? I've pushed the phantoms up here, which prevents the knights from getting to anything too scary, I believe. I think it actually blocks them from reaching the Bloodworms altogether. Because, let's see, maybe? I think they can see them. They would have to definitely go through the woods to do it. It'd definitely prevent them from making an unhindered charge, and they are in the front as well, if they're even in range. Because I was doing a lot of checking during this game to make sure that all these knight units either couldn't see me, or if they could see me, they were in the front or blocked or going to become hindered. So you can see here I've moved my Shadow Hulk not into the woods because, again, I'm just keeping this Night Horde out of the game for the moment by denying it any line of sight to my units. And then I've put some lightning bolt wounds onto this winged general. Turn 3, so on my right flank, the winged general who was facing off with the fiends has flown into this gap here, hiding from the fiends and also threatening the flank of my army. I do have a plan to potentially deal with that. So, because this thing is shorter than a Shadow Hulk, what I'm going to do in a minute is turn the Shadow Hulk round and look at it, attempt to stay out of the knight's line of sight, but also block the line of sight of this thing to anything that I don't want to be charged. The Reapers can then come round this way, stay out of its charge arc, and even though I've turned a Shadow Hulk round to look at this thing, I think it's probably worth it for the strategic value of preventing this thing rear or flank charging all my units. So it's good use of a unit like this to force that move, because this thing is a bit cheaper than a Shadow Hulk. But it also has really good strategic value, so I think it's worth turning around a more expensive unit to block it. And up here you can see that there's a counter charge going on there. The knights, let's see what was going on there. They position themselves there. I think they're hiding mostly from the Shadow Hulk, so it can't see them, because obviously I've not got it in the woods because I'm hiding from the knights as well. They're in a prime spot to strike at something there, after having to deal with the phantoms in a moment. If they charge the phantoms, then they of course would get charged by multiple units, which would put all my units right up there in his face. So probably right not to take the bait, and instead maybe try to shoot off the phantoms, but I think everything misses anyway. There's a bit of damage done to the fiends from shooting, but not much. The Soul Flayers take 6 wounds back from the archers, but not enough to waver them, which is nice. So I'm going to get another round of punching the archers in the face, or swiping them with the scythes, shall we say. On to turn 3 for me. So you can see that the Shadow Hulk has turned round, stayed out of the line of sight of the knights on the hill, but made sure that this winged general is in the front. The Reapers have come back this way. The fiends have angled themselves a bit so that they can actually see him now next turn if he stays there, and staying out of charge range of this Night Horde. Okay, so I've got him just in the front there. So if he wants to charge in, he's going to be hindered as well, so he's going to do absolutely nothing to this Shadow Hulk. Not that I'd be worried about being charged by him anyway. The Soul Flayers get this archer unit up to 12 wounds. They're getting close to death now, and we're tying them up nicely. The Phantoms make a hindered charge into those knights, hoping to just do a wound, take away their thunderous charge next time. And over here, so this winged general is also a bit of a problem. The butchers have kept him in the front to make sure there's no issue there. If he wants to flank charge the Bloodworms, welcome to it. It's not going to really do much to them. There is a horde of swordsmen there as well. And let's see. So yeah, this side, these knights aren't really accomplishing much in their current position. So That's one thing when I was looking at it, thinking if my opponent had deployed the knights a bit further this way, I would have been more concerned in this situation. As it is, I'm kind of just delaying here because I feel very good about the middle. I've got everything closing in now. So if I can delay on the flanks, which I'm effectively doing at the moment, then I'm quite happy with that. If I can start killing these scary central high unit strength units, and this benefits me, I would say, this stalemate here, because my opponent has a very expensive, powerful unit being tied up there. And on this side, this unit's not doing much either. Turn 4. So, you can see a Krampus has made its way in and plinked one wound onto lots of things with its Cloak of Death, which is obviously hilarious. The Winged General decides, rather than charging anybody from behind there, jump over to the other side and just look into the rear of my army. It's on 2 wounds already, so whenever I see that, I see a unit that's looking at the rear or the flank of my entire army. So I've allowed it to get into that position, so not intentionally, of course. You don't go into a game hoping that a unit is looking into the rear and flank of your army, but when it happens, you think, what can I do about that? You can't just turn around your whole army to look at it. So what counters do I have? I've got lots of lightning bolt that I'm going to throw at it and try and waver it. That is my entire strategy. But then there's also this one to worry about, which is less worrying because I've got units around here that can maybe block its view. You can see where the knights are now, by the way. The knights have advanced under cover from these mounted scouts who are blocking off the charge of the fiends who won't be able to charge the Night Horde now, and they're staying out of the sight of the Shadow Hulk. Those knights are. So very wise. So lots of devious positioning going on. Over here you can see the Soul Flayers have taken more damage, but again not enough to waver or kill them, so feeling very good about that. The archers have been rolling quite poorly for their damage and nerves, it has to be said. Turn 4 for me. So, second, I'm going to cough. So, the fiends charge into the mounted scouts. 11 wounds, double one them. Initially I was thinking, oh no, that might be bad, but it's not bad at all, and I'll show you why in a minute. Here, my Shadow Hulk has gone into the woods, getting out of everyone's charge arc, so the knights now have to move or they're going to get charged in the flank by the Shadow Hulk. And the Horror is hiding from anyone's charge as well, and the Reapers are staying out of line of sight of this flying general. Then, some Lightning Bolt onto him. I believe this one I do Lightning Bolt and Waver, rather than this one. So I choose this one as the target. And just accept that this one's going to be able to do some charging. The Butchers make their way towards this Knight unit, because why not? And if they make a hindered charge, they are much more bothered by a hindered charge than I am, because they lose their Thunderous, I don't lose my Crushing. In the middle, you can see that the Bloodworms and the Soul Flayers were able to take out the Bowman Horde. The Bloodworms are now looking this way, so we've got the Shadow Hulk and the Bloodworms against this Swordsman unit. The Phantoms, oh yeah, worth pointing out, in the last turn my opponent forgot to attack the Phantoms, and that's the doorbell. I'm going to go have to answer that. It might be an exciting delivery. I'll be right back. Okay, I have returned, and it was an exciting delivery. It is somebody's Christmas present. So I'm not going to reveal live on the air what it is, though. Okay, where were we? So, Bloodworms. Oh, I remember. We were talking about this combat here. So, these knights forgot to attack the phantoms on the previous turn. Well, my opponent forgot to do the attacks. And by the time that we remembered that that combat hadn't taken place, quite a bit of the game had progressed. Like, decisions were made, charges were made, units were moved, dice were rolled. Quite a lot had gone on. And I think because of that, my opponent said it's basically, he's not going to try and then do the attacks out of sequence, because quite a lot of the game had developed. And generally, if someone forgets to do attacks, then I'm pretty generous and will let people go back and do it. So I think in this occasion, I think if my opponent had said, do you mind if I do those attacks now? Quite a bit of the game had gone on. So probably what I would have said as a compromise is, because lots of decisions have been made based on this unit still being alive and the game has progressed, I would say roll the attacks, but then don't roll a nerve test at the end of it. So you can damage the unit, but not remove them from the game. And I think that would have been fair. So actually, I could have even pitched that as a solution, rather than just allowing my opponent to not roll the attacks. So I would recommend that to anybody. If the game has progressed and someone forgets to attack with a particular unit, then because decisions have been made based on that unit still being alive, then just say, okay, roll to damage, but we just won't do a nerve test. So you can accumulate the damage you would have had last turn, but keep them on the table, because otherwise we're winding back too much of the game. I think that would have been fair. So the knights attacks by the phantoms and take some wounds, and they might actually get wavered, to be honest. Can't remember. Actually, that might be their... What's their special rule? Their special rule, so they inspire themselves and they're fearless for a turn. I think that might be what the token's for, which means they haven't cashed it in yet. Okay, so... Yeah, I didn't mention that, by the way, but all the units of knights have that ability once per game to make themselves fearless and self-inspire, which is a pretty powerful ability. You usually have an idea when you're about to be attacked horribly. So, okay, you'll notice here that the Night Horde has not charged into the Fiends after that double one. That is because this unit of scouts are in the way. So even after they were double one, this unit could not physically move far enough out of the way in either direction so that this Night Horde could pivot clear of them and charge into the Fiends. No matter what they tried, going backwards, sideways, backwards, pivoting, then going backwards more, backwards, pivoting, going forwards, there was no way they could get far enough for that Night Horde to either fit or to pivot fully clear of them and still be able to make it in. There were a few positions this unit could get to where the Night Horde were able to pivot through them, but they would then be charging in this sort of direction rather than forwards. So we tried, well, it's one of those situations where obviously your opponent is trying mostly to find a position that will work, but you end up kind of almost as a cooperative sort of thing, because you're just looking within the laws of geometry. Is there a way that this unit can actually fit? And we couldn't find one. So they were unable to charge into the Fiends. So the scouts who were double wand, it's actually been a great benefit to me, because the Night Horde maybe would have killed the Fiends. As it stands, the Night Horde are left with nothing to do for this turn. So, yeah, you'll see what they do in a minute. Over here, this guy decides the best course of action is to rear charge this Shadow Hulk with the Swordsman. Now, is that the best move? It's definitely a decent move, I would say, because this Swordsman horde charging into the Shadow Hulk in the front, not guaranteed to kill it. And if you don't kill it, you're then getting flanked by a legion of Bloodworms, which is probably a death sentence. So throwing that guy into the rear there probably a good move, I would argue. Okay. So you can see what the knights do at this stage. Because they can't make that charge, all they can do is just turn around and make sure the Shadow Hulk can't flank charge them or rear charge them. So that unit surviving has been a great hindrance to the kingdoms of men here. And before we go on, so had I been able to work out all those complicated angles and positionings in my head beforehand, I could have maybe chosen just to sit in front of the scouts and not charge them. But because obviously I didn't do all that in my head, it's almost impossible to do it really. It's such a complicated setup because of this building here. You really have to pick up units and put tokens and stuff to figure out where the unit was before and then start moving them. It's only when you pick them up and start pivoting them round that you actually see precisely what you can do. So I had no idea when I chose to charge that unit that not killing them was going to be a great benefit. And look at this. Loads of damage onto the Shadow Hulk. Double one. The nightmare. The one time you don't want to roll a double one is when there's a legion of Bloodworms looking at your flank. If you could pick one situation to avoid a double one, it would probably be then. So, they're going to die. Turn 5. So the Shadow Hulk charges into the Night Horde just to tie them up and get rid of their Thunderous, which they are very reliant on. The Fiends do kill the mounted scouts this time. The Reapers are still just chilling because this guy is still a danger, so they don't want to get charged by him because they're carrying some valuable unit strength that I might need for the scenario. Up here, the Bloodworms in the flank, the Shadow Hulk. I think the Shadow Hulk charged as well because I wanted to make sure that the unit died. So they just about killed it because the Bloodworms were of course hindered by this terrain. And then the Shadow Hulk turns around to face this mounted winged hero again. And some damage done to the Night Horde, but not much, but got rid of their Thunderous. And over on this area here, you can see that unit of knights that were fighting the Phantoms were charged by the Soul Flayers and killed. So it's looking very good at this point. And oh yeah, also the Butchers up here have got into the Knights. So hitting first, but hindered, but doing some damage, and the Butchers are definitely going to win that grind because the Knights have lost their Thunderous now. Turn 6. So what can the Kingdoms of Men do? They can do a bit of damage to the Butchers, but not enough. The Butchers have decent nerve. This guy, again, fails to kill the Shadow Hulk. And I don't know what you can say at this point. I think he double wand it again. This Shadow Hulk takes some wounds from the Knights, but not enough. And yeah, this is just comedy at this stage. So, turn 6 for me, and at this point it occurs to me that I haven't lost a single unit in this game. And that's how it's going to look at the end of my turn 6. So, the Shadow Hulk kills the... I think, did he kill that thing? I can't remember because certain units have been moved. But the Butchers kill those Knights. The Fiends and the Soul Flayers and the Shadow Hulk combine to kill the Night Horde, and all my units just make sure that I'm scoring maximum points. I've got the Mind Screech in that zone, Bloodworms in here. I think that guy might be alive, so I think the Shadow Hulk might have failed to kill this one. I think the other one is dead. The one that was here may have been killed by Lightning Bolt though. I think I may have killed one of them. I think those are all the units that were alive. The War Machines, which I never really attacked, and the Individuals, which obviously can't score in this scenario. So, very successful game. It has to be said, though, my opponent did kind of hit a wall with the dice. The wall being double wanting this unit multiple times, and there were some really poor rounds of attacks as well. The artillery didn't actually land one hit during the entire game, which, while they're on 6s against my entire army, you might expect them to get a very small number of hits in the game, but 0 is maybe a bit bit bad, really, isn't it? And let's see, any of the units of mine that should have been killed but weren't. It's mainly the Shadow Hulk. And obviously that was a huge one because it was the swordsman. It got them killed, failing to kill it. And the swordsmen were an important unit in this scenario. The flanks went very well, also because of the Phantoms ended up holding up that unit of knights for longer because my opponent obviously forgot to do the attacks. So whether that led to them dying, who can say, because they might not have actually killed the Phantoms with one more round. They may well have done, and then they would have been able to turn to face the Soul Flayers. So even if they'd already been damaged, they may have died anyway, but it may have taken longer. So all those things conspiring, and just a bad day at the office for the Kingdoms of Men there. And those pink dice. On to round 3. So for that game, I picked up almost maximum points. I think if I'd killed one more unit, I would have got maximum points, because I score all the zones, and I killed quite a lot. So I ended up with 9 points out of 10. If I'd killed that thing as well, I would have got maximum 10 out of 10. Next round, up against Orcs. You don't see normal Orcs much these days, but here we go. So we've got Troll Horde, Staying Stone, one of my standard upgrades on Trolls there. Skulk Outriders, so just a little bit of Orc cavalry there with short bows. Regiment of Orklings. Skulk Raider Chariots. Regiment, so they have bows as well. A troop and a legion of fight wagons. A Troll Bruiser. Trudger on a chariot. Trudger on a winged slasher. And then Molgurk's Mad Mob formation. So 2 regiment Gore Chariots and a War Drum. Well, this army has a lot more speed than I do. We've got an 8, 8, 7, 7, 8, 10, 9, 8. There's lots of high numbers compared to my list. So I'm not that confident on that basis. And they're all hard-hitting units as well. And there's not a lot of shooting. So again, I'm not going to get the most out of my stealthy, like in Game 1. Unlike Game 2, where it just helped me avoid the artillery for the entire game. So the scenario in round 3 is secure the field. And so, the way this one, it's a little bit complicated because of the scoring for this tournament. So, choose a piece of terrain, starting with the player that chose to roll sides. You choose a terrain piece entirely in your opponent's half of the table and at least 12 inches away from their opponent's chosen terrain piece. At the end of the game, add up all the unit strength of your units that are within 3 inches of your chosen terrain piece on the opponent's half of the table. So it's a bit like Invade, except you can only score on a specific terrain piece rather than just the entire half of the table. And then at the end, you score up to 7 for how much unit strength you had on it. And there's some weird kind of tie-breaky rules if both players end up with 7, and if both people get more than 7, but it's a bit complicated at that point. So, Orcs against Nightstalkers. My opponent has chosen this piece of difficult terrain here, with the water in the middle, and I have chosen this hill as my terrain piece that I want to try and claim, which explains why I've got most of my army looking at it. Now, my lack of confidence based on the enemy list, I believe is founded because there is a lot of speed 8 units, and they all hit hard. So a lot of my units would not like to stand up to that for a round. The Bloodworms could definitely take a hit from some of these units, but not from 3 or 4 of them at once. The Shadow Hulks, pretty much the same. They could take hit from 1, possibly 2 units at once, if there's difficult terrain involved, maybe. But overall, if we look at things like the Reapers, they're not fast enough to really threaten this stuff, so they're going to have to stay in the second line and just hit whatever hits me first. And they're quite high defense as well. Let's have a look. 5, 3 for the feeble stuff, but then lots of 5, lots of defense 5. So my lightning bolt might not be that effective either against high defense. But I've got a plan anyway. I'm going to push my high unit strength units, Bloodworms, Butchers, Fiends. those three, carrying a lot of my unit strength, towards the hill. I'm going to try and control this flank pretty much. I've got a Shadow Hulk striding forward there to face off with the trolls, and I've got some Soul Flayers that I'm going to try and do a flank manoeuvre with. There's no other speed from the enemy on this side, so I've got the speed monopoly there. So we'll see what I choose to do with that, whether I can use it wisely. My opponent has all the speed over here, so I want my opponent to hit when it's not that beneficial to do so. So, suboptimal conditions. So I want him to charge into difficult terrain to hit the Shadow Hulk. Got my Phantoms there to block off some charges. So on the turn, I think my opponent is going to start charging in. I can put the Phantoms in front of one of the units, or maybe two, to stop them joining in. And then I've got the Fiends, who are one of my speed units on this side as well, who can match most of this stuff for speed. So that's my plan. And then I'll hope to just hold this area with my 3 unit strength units. The Fiends, though, may have to get called over to this side. Okay, there's the opponent's army, the Trolls and a Bruiser there. Oh yeah, I should point out that the Troll Bruiser has the Pipes of Terror, is it? Let's see, Troll Bruiser, Pipes of Terror, yeah. Which I completely forget that it has, by the way. Oh yeah, we've got some nice cinematic shots here. Look at that. Dum, da, 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 dum, da, 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 dum. You can see some other table action over there as well. Okay, turn 1. My opponent goes first and advances forward. And this is the kind of thing I was worried about. So this big speed 10 creature has obviously got a massive reach, which means things that are in the back line can't be in its charge range, because they will get killed, and then it'll turn around and it'll be looking at my entire army's rear. So I can't afford to let it land behind me. So I've got to keep things like this out of its charge range, the Mind Screeches, and if it's going to hit anything, make sure it's the front. There's so much speed on this side here. I'm not feeling that great after deployment, actually. Turn 1 for me, and pushing up a bit. Put the Soul Flayers forward, just to cause a bit of a nuisance there. And I immediately fling the Phantoms in, because I want to advance the Bloodworms, and I don't want them to get horribly flanked by this Legion. So, I want them up there, keeping everyone else out of charge range of this flyer. Now, is that a bad move? Should I just ignore the fact there's a big flyer and push everyone up? Maybe, because I'm not offering that much reason for my opponent to engage yet. I think I've got the mild shooting supremacy with my lightning bolt compared to bows, but it's not a huge mismatch. There's no real incentive for my opponent to push things forward into my charge range. So maybe I should be more aggressive with my push at the moment, but I'm sending the Bloodworms up there, but trying to stop them being multi-charged. Turn 2 for my opponent. So more angling, trying to get in position to do multi-charges as you would. In this situation, the Troll Bruiser is looking that way at the Soul Flayers now. And they're both staying out of the arc of the Soul Flayers, of course. And at this stage I'm thinking, Soul Flayers, they're not nimble, they're only speed 8. What should I do with them? I've got some options. And I'll tell you why I make the wrong option in a minute. So, oh yeah, this is a... What spell is this? It's the... I think it gives the unit a hindered charge when they go in. I can't remember what it's called, the spell. But they go in hindered, and they can't have Pathfinder or Strider for the turn. So, very powerful spell. So the Shadow Hulk is going to be way less effective in combat if it chooses to go in with that hindrance on it. The Phantoms are killed, but the Orcs decide not to push in this turn. They just clear out the chaff and mostly back off or reposition. So, how am I feeling now? Not great still, because there's all this speed looking at me. Turn 2, so what am I going to do? Just re-angle, make sure no one's in the flanks, no one can hit the flanks, wait for them to come in and hit me, and then just counter-charge. Just all I can do, really. On this side, so the Soul Flayers, this is not the best move here. So the Shadow Hulk is moving up there. what I wanted to do was force both of them to attack me. So the trolls have to attack here, the bruiser has to attack them. And I did a quick maths in my head and thought, you know what, the bruiser probably going to lose to them on average, and I think the Shadow Hulk can take the trolls. Are those true statements? Possibly. The Shadow Hulk gets bonus attacks against big stuff and hits on 3s, so the Shadow Hulk maybe do a good job taking them down. This one is way too close, and the fact that the bruiser has the Pipes of Terror, which I forgot about, I think nudges it into the territory of I shouldn't let it get the first hit in. So what I should have done, really, is flown them into the difficult terrain and then turned, so that it has to charge me into the difficult terrain. Which means that, on average, it's a fight that I then become more likely to win. I believe, if I've mathed it correctly. And then if it doesn't charge me in the difficult terrain, I can then freely charge out of the difficult terrain because they're flyers, so they will ignore the terrain they fly out of when they land. So it kind of has to go after them. I think that's what I should have done there. Everyone else just re-angles, keeping things out of charge range of the flyer, and we're kind of just circling round each other to get to our terrain piece that we're trying to hold. So it could end up with no kills if it carries on like this. Well, very few, because only the phantoms have gone down so far. And a bit of lightning bolt onto the dragon, because that's the big threat because it's so fast, so I'm trying to lightning bolt that thing to death. So, the cavalry and the trolls go into the Shadow Hulk, the bruiser goes into the soul flayers. And we have these two, which I think these are fight wagons. So they've gone into the Shadow Hulk down here in the difficult terrain. And everyone else is just repositioned around them. So, is anything killed? The Fiends are given that spell that means they're going to make a hindered charge next turn. Soul Flayers take 5 damage. And because of the Pipes of Terror, they end up getting wavered. You can see the Bruiser was already on 2 wounds, by the way. That's because I'd previously targeted it with my shooting, anticipating that it was going to get into a showdown here, which would have nudged it in my favour, it already being on 2 wounds. I would have hoped to waver it in the next round of attacks and then kill it after that. But because it's wavered them with the Pipes of Terror, now suddenly the odds are greatly in the Bruiser's favour. Shadow Hulk doesn't take much damage though. This one does, however. Well, it takes 10, and then 10 on the nerve check to kill it. So, did Shadow Hulk, very high nerve, and it's gone. And I didn't have my inspiring source nearby, and my opponent carefully didn't keep any of the inspiring units, which I think is that one, didn't bring it within range of my Shadow Hulk. So, the flanks suddenly aren't looking too hot. This one I wasn't confident in anyway. This one, it was just slightly bad move on my part there that could have made it much more healthy. And I think I could have been more aggressive in the middle here and just allowed things like the big flyer to charge me for a round, because at least it stops it being a threat once it's in there fighting. Turn 3. The Reapers go in, do very little, and very disappointing from them. Shadow Hulk and the Butchers. Okay, so here's an interesting situation. The Butchers here and the Shadow Hulk want to charge this unit. We got all the lasers and all the things out to see whether the Butchers could see this unit. We established they could see it, because the base of the Shadow Hulk doesn't actually extend as far back as the foot. The foot does overhang significantly, so they can see the unit there. We then wanted to figure out which side the Shadow Hulk would slide to, because that would determine whether they could actually get into combat. And we figured out that well, there was 2 things, there was 2 readings of the rules. It's either you go from the leader point of the trolls there, and then you kind of, like a radar, kind of fan out until you hit someone's leader point. And that's the one that goes on that side, and then you keep going until you hit another one, and then they go on that side. Which would have meant the Butchers would have to be on this side, which means that they couldn't get there, because the Shadow Hulk's in the way. However, the other reading of it is that you draw a straight line directly forwards from the unit, leader point, and just sweep across until you hit a leader point, which would be the Shadow Hulk first, and then keep going, and then it's the Butchers. So the Shadow Hulk goes that way. And we weren't 100% sure which was correct after consulting the rulebook, so we asked some other players, and the consensus was that you do the kind of line, straight line ahead that sweeps until you hit something, rather than the kind of radar arc. So If anyone knows that to be incorrect, then let me know, and I'll look into it more deeply. But that was our understanding, so the double charge was possible. And my plan is to double charge those trolls, kill them, pivot to not get flanked by the dragon, and lightning bolt the dragon up real bad, because it's already heavily, I say heavily, it's wounded. It's got some wounds on it. So if I can waver that thing with lightning bolt, that would stop it being a threat entirely. And look at that, only 8 wounds. So the Shadow Hulk gets about 12 attacks in this combat and missed with about 10 of them on 3s. So the Shadow Hulk did absolutely nothing. Almost comical. The dragon takes maybe a wound from lightning bolt or 2, and I can't roll a high enough nerve check. I think I needed to roll 8 based on that damage to waver it, and couldn't do it. And the Krampus, you can see, putting wounds on units left and right as it dances in there. So very little accomplished that turn. The Fiends didn't kill this big chariot unit. And the Fiends, really, I just wanted to throw them in because if I don't charge, they're going to get charged, and that means there's going to be Thunderous Charge coming at them. So I might as well chuck them in. Next, round 4. So, because of the combined terribleness of the attacks here and the lightning bolt, the dragon is able to flank, well, the winged slasher, I should say, is able to flank the butchers, falls into the Shadow Hulk. The Bruiser's going to try and finish off the Soul Flayers who were wavered last time. And we've got multi-charges going in on the Reapers, who are almost certainly going to die, and the Fiends as well. And the Bloodworms are untouched though, which is nice. Soulflayer's dead. Shadow Hulk not dead. Butcher's dead. Fiend's dead. Reaper's wavered. You'd expect them to die of all these units, but they did not. So we're looking a bit thin on the ground, and I would say it was already game over a little while ago. After this point. After I'd gone for that charge and failed to kill the trolls and failed to do anything to the slasher. I'd say at that stage it was over. But it's definitely over now. So I'm just going to try and maximise the points I can get. I don't know why I dropped into that accent for a second. I'm going to maximise all the points and hope it pushes me up in the leaderboard, maybe even into the top 3 if I can score a few points. Let's find out. So this beast is now looking at the Bloodworms, which isn't nice. So they're going to have to charge something and kill it and then turn around and not get killed. So we'll see whether they can accomplish that. The Mind Screeches go after the dragon again and do 1 wound to it with their Lightning Bolt 15. You heard me correctly. The Shadow Hulk kills the trolls and then overruns out of the charge arc of the Skulks. Skulk Cavalry. The Reapers can't do anything, and the Bloodworms did kill that big legion of, was it chariots or fight wagons? Either way, it's dead. But the Bloodworms, because I couldn't kill this dragon, only did 1 wound with the lightning bolt. I now have a choice of face that way and get recharged by chariots, or face that way and get recharged by this winged slasher. So, really, what can you do in that situation? You're going to die, just pick which side is going to multiply its attacks. So I decided to face the dragon. And they're going to get killed now. One of the Mind Screeches is going to get killed by the cavalry. That, a million charges go in there. And I think Krampus did that wound. Bruiser trying to take down the Shadow Hulk, but doesn't. Mind Screech doesn't get killed either. The Reapers are dead. Bloodworms take 1 billion wounds and they're dead as well. So obviously this is not going very well. Mind Screech countercharges there. This one tries to Lightning Bolt the dragon again along with the Horror, but they fail again. I think they again do either 0 or 1 wound to it and fail on the nerve, if I even got to roll 1. Shadow Hulk doesn't kill the Bruiser. So this is not going very well at all, as you can tell. So not much left alive, just trying to maximise points though. So all I'm thinking of is I have to get units near that hill just to get extra tournament points. One of the Mind Screeches can go over there. And if I can kill a unit, that'll get me some more points as well. So, turn 6. Because my Shadow Hulk is fighting the Bruiser, it's flanked by the Slasher. And this Mind Screech gets charged by the Fight Wagons, I think that's what they are. So, Shadow Hulk is dead. Mind Screech is dead. So, all I do at the end of the game in my turn is just move my Mind Screech towards this hill to get me a victory point, and thus a tournament point, and try and lightning bolt something off with the horror. But you'll see again, no more wounds done to the dragon. So it may have been the worst game of lightning bolt I've ever had in my life, potentially. The turn where I actually did any decent damage, I rolled a really low attempt at the nerve check on it, I think. And yeah, because I had it up to 10 wounds at one point, as you can see there. And I must have rolled nerve when I got it to that level, but couldn't even waver it, which would have saved me significantly. Because this flank is obviously where all my important units were for scenario scoring purposes. And at this stage, the game's over. So these units did actually hit a bit of a roadblock with the Reapers. It took them longer than I was expecting to get through that. And they had a bit of a traffic jam, and they don't want to move away from their scoring area either. So I would have been free to score some more points had it gone a little bit better over here. As you can see though, it did not. The Shadow Hulk doing really badly with its attacks on the trolls, and then the lightning bolt for the entire game being miserable. Not ideal. So obviously there were things that I've spotted that I could have done differently there. The Soul Flayers shouldn't have been so confident with the Troll Bruiser and should have sat in the difficult terrain instead if they were going to take the first hit. It wasn't even necessary to take the first hit, it was just me putting them in that position. So I could have used their speed, maybe better elsewhere. And I could have grouped up my army instead of fighting on two fronts. I could have just pushed everything forward in the same area. Definitely doable. There's no reason to be across both sides of the table really if I just wanted to score on this one. Could have just gone up there and accepted that we would kind of swing round each other's army and not fight. But where's the fun in that though? So there you go, that's the final image. Not very successful final game, but overall finished pretty decently high in the standings. And I can confirm as well that I did win the Best Painted Army Award. So very pleased with that. That was the initial goal of selecting this list in the first place. Lots of exciting, new, fresh units that a lot of effort's gone into, particularly the second Shadow Hulk. I don't think having two Shadow Hulks in the army is really optimal. I'm not even sure one is optimal. I'm going to continue using them just because I think they look really cool with no tactical basis whatsoever. Because I think, for instance, let's see, a Legion of Bloodworms is much scarier than, for example, two Mind Screeches. And they're about the same points. I think a Legion of Bloodworms is much scarier than a Shadow Hulk. And a Shadow Hulk is about, how many points less? About 75 points less. So, I think the Soul Flayers still have a part to play as well. I'm not convinced that taking them all out the list is the way forward. I don't think one unit of them is enough. I think they're still good. I'm not sold on the Fiends. They didn't really do it for me at this event. Maybe I could have just used them better, but I think hitting on 4s, I feel like I would rather have the extra Soul Flayers with the flying ability. It's a tough one. I've got plenty of other units to choose from. I've got more Chaff, I've got Needle Fangs and Shadowhounds, I've got Scarecrows, I've got Dread Fiends, I've got all the individuals, still got the Banshee, got the Shade, got the Reaper, is it the Reaper Blood Drinker, is it? Yeah, so I've got lots of options, and I'm also working on more options as well. I'm working on more big scary monsters that are not optimal in lists at all. And yeah, exciting times ahead for the Nightstalkers still, even though they've been hit with this nerf bat recently. So obviously very pleased to win the Best Painted Army Award at Krampus Karnage. And that means that, let me think, which armies have I won Best Painted or Best Army Awards for? I've won it for my Undead Halflings, I've won it for my Abyssal Dwarves, and now I've won it for my Nightstalkers. So not for my Goblins, as I wouldn't expect to anyway, because I don't think they're the best painted. And their bases aren't very exciting either. Just plain snow, mostly. So I'm pleased to have a Best Painted award for 3 different armies in the Kings of War realm now. And going into the end of this season, I think there's one event left, and then it's the cut-off point for the Masters. And at the moment, I think I'm 15th out of, I don't know how many hundreds of players it is, but the top 16 qualify for the Masters, and I'm currently 15th. So, unless 2 players above me, I say above, unless 2 players below me have a really, really impressively good final tournament of the season, and it replaces one of their other results, and they end up jumping above me, then I should qualify for the Masters. And even if I end up finishing 17th or 18th, I believe there's still a good chance that I would be invited anyway, because usually a couple of people can't attend from the top 16 anyway, which is usually me, to be fair. But this year is the one year I would actually want to attend, because it's in Nottingham, and that's where I'm living right now, so it would be nice to go to the Masters. I don't know what I'd actually take to the Masters, because I don't think my list there is very optimal. Whether I would just take an army that looks cool, just to be different at the Masters, who knows, maybe I would go with Abyssal Dwarves. I've got another horde of golems painted, so I've got 3 hordes now, so I could make a nice list with them. I've got more gargoyles than I used to have, so could do a good Abyssal Dwarf list. Could try and make a Nightstalker list that's actually competitive rather than just looks cool. Got plotting to do. Let me know if you have any thoughts on the Nightstalkers, on this event, on any rules issues that pops up that you think were maybe played incorrectly, or anything that you've been enlightened on as a result of watching this video. Any comments on the armies, and what's coming up next? Well, the next tournament, there's an Age of Sigmar tournament coming up in about 10 days-ish. A nice festive one, a week or so before Christmas. And let's have a look at my event calendar, actually. I've got a little notebook here with all my events down in it. Let's see what's coming up, because obviously if you stayed to this point in the video, you care about Kings of War. So let's see when the next one is. We have got, let's see, may well have a Kings of War event in February. That might be the next one for Kings of War. Before then, there's a couple of Age of Sigmar events. There's one at Warhammer World, which is weirdly on a weekday, which just happens to fall on the one weekday I'm not working that week, which is nice, so I'm going to that in January. There is a Dead Zone event as well, coming up in early February. And there's the next 2 Kings of War, it looks like, one in February and one in March. So I'll be on the lookout for any prior to that, and then another one is in July that I've signed up for. So I'm sure I'll fill in the spots in the calendar as time goes on as well. So let me know if you know of any Kings of War events that are taking place in the meantime that I can feasibly get to from Nottingham. And I think that's about it. So obviously, if you enjoy this juicy, fresh, spicy content being delivered straight to your senses via the internet, then why not pledge your life savings to support this channel on Patreon, which all it does really, that Patreon account at the moment, it just goes to pay for my entry into tournaments and travel to tournaments at the moment. It doesn't quite cover the cost of that right now, but it goes towards that. So it all goes straight back into more delicious content. And don't forget to check out all the links in the description, the various social media, the Facebook group, there's Twitter, there's the Andy and Rem Show Discord server. Yeah, any fans of the Andy and Rem Show or Age of Sigmar fantasy gaming in general, the Andy and Rem Show is coming back very soon. Rem is back in the country. He is getting back up to speed, and I'm going to be back on that particular train. Choo choo. And you can look forward to that. I think that's the lot. So, don't forget to leave comments, like the video, subscribe and all that malarkey. And all that remains to be said is, Good night out there, whatever you are.